we'll be discussing, as Michael mentioned, the SharePoint Advanced Management guidance for deploying Microsoft 365 Copilot. So, this guidance is crucial for ensuring a secure, efficient, and compliant deployment within the company. So let me quickly, set the stage with SharePoint Advanced Management, or of course, at Microsoft, we use lots of acronyms, and we do have one for SharePoint Advanced Management, which is SAM. So if you hear that, don't get confused. We're talking about SharePoint Advanced Management. So yeah, let's talk about it. At its core, SAM is designed to help orgs, tackle three key interconnected challenges. First up, from the left is content sprawl. The longer your organization uses SharePoint and OneDrive, so the more content gets created. And over time, the content can grow exponentially, making it harder to manage, organize, and secure. Then there's the oversharing in the middle of the screen, which is a major focus of our today's conversation. So sharing in Microsoft 365 is incredibly easy, as you know, and that's both a strength and a risk. So sometimes sharing broadly is exactly what you want, but other times it can lead to some sensitive information being exposed unintentionally. So we'll look at, how SAM helps you identify when oversharing happens and what you can do to fix it. And finally, on the right hand of the screen, we have the lifecycle management component. So, which might seem like a separate issue, but it's actually tightly connected. So think about like stale content, files, and any sites that are no longer active in your environment, but still hanging around. So without a plan, to clean that up, it just adds to the clutter and risk. So SAM gives you like tools to address that too. So before we dive into the actual SAM capabilities, let's spend a moment on the idea of oversharing, because it's a big one. Now, oversharing can happen in a bunch of different ways. So some of the risks are pretty obvious, like accidentally giving access to sensitive files or sharing too broadly without realizing it. But there's one risk that might not be so obvious, and that's how oversharing affects Copilot and Search. So these tools are designed to surface content that's relevant to you. If you've got access to a bunch of old or irrelevant content, stuff that's stale or shouldn't be in your scope anymore, that's going to show up in your search results and in your Copilot responses. And that means, the value you get from Copilot in this type of situation, like how useful and accurate those responses are, can take a hit. So managing, oversharing isn't just about security, but it's also about making sure your AI tools are working at their best. So this slide gives a quicker summary of the different ways oversharing can happen. I won't go through each one line by line. Instead, I'll speak more broadly. But a lot of it comes down to your default settings. So by default, SharePoint and OneDrive often make it easy to share content broadly. And let's be honest, most people tend to go with the default in this situation. So it's just the human nature, especially when you're busy and trying to get things done quickly. So, while that ease of sharing is great for collaboration between users, it can also lead to problems if content is shared too widely or inappropriately. And basically, this is where SAM comes in to help organizations get ahead of these risks and put better guardrails in place. Now, before I get into the actual guidance, I want to quickly highlight something important. So SAM is really easy to get started with. In fact, for many tenants, it's already included with the Copilot license, so the Microsoft 365 Copilot license. And you might already have access without realizing it. Now, when it comes to governance, SAM can help you move faster than you'd expect. And here's a simple first step I always recommend. So you go and run a couple of reports in your environment. Just take a look at how many inactive sites you have, sites that, let's say, haven't been touched in months. Also check how many sites have broadly shared content. That alone gives you basically like a clear picture of your surface area, your starting point, and helps you understand how big the potential problem is. Uh, Now, if you're already using Purview and have labeled your sites, now SAM can take full advantage of this functionality. So those labels show up in the oversharing reports in SAM, making it easier to tell which instances of broad sharing are appropriate and which aren't. So again, there's definitely a better together story here with Purview, but it's not a requirement for sure. And finally, on this slide, like if you're working with a small IT team but managing a large number of sites, SAM is built with that in mind. It's designed to delegate governance tasks to site owners, so IT doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting. You'll see that reflected in our guidance today, and I'm gonna go about and walk through that in our next slides.
Hey, George, one real quick thing I want to highlight there. If you have M365 Copilots or that premium license in any capacity, it pretty much unlocks SAM for your whole tenant. So just a thing I wanted to point out there. So if you've got Copilot, you should have everything that we're going to discuss here today.
That is correct. Absolutely. And it's enough to have just one turned on in your tenant. Like you don't need a bunch of like hundreds or thousands of Microsoft licenses. So just one would work in this situation. Yeah. All right. Now let's walk through the 5 recommended steps for getting started with SAM. I'll also share a little bonus step at the end, but these 5 are really the foundation here. I want to keep the framing simple. I'll go into each step in more detail with screenshots and videos, but let's start with the first one. So step 1 is actually the only one that doesn't involve SAM directly. It's about reviewing your SharePoint sharing settings. I'm not saying there's one perfect configuration that fits every org, but it's important to take a look and ask yourself in this situation, are the default settings that we have today aligned with how we want sharing to work? Because if they're not, that's something you can adjust right away. So let's take a look at what those settings are and how they might be impacting your environment. Let's start with the first setting, as I said, so you should take a look at, which is sharing links. Now, you probably know that when someone generates a sharing link in SharePoint or OneDrive, the default setting usually allows access to anyone inside the organization, right? That's might be super convenient, but it's also pretty broad. And depending on your governance goals, that might be totally fine, or it might be way too open. So the good news is you're not locked into that default. You can change it so that users have to specify individual people when they share. So that way the link only works for those named users, much more restrictive and controlled. You can also, adjust whether the default link gives edit permissions or just view access. So it's worth going through the exercise of asking again, what's the right default for us? And just a quick note here, these settings can be configured at both the tenant level and the site level. So site owners have that kind of flexibility too. That's something to keep in mind as you think about governance across your organization. Now, this next setting isn't going to be relevant for every organization, but for some, it makes a huge difference. I'm talking about the everyone except external users claim that shows up in the people picker. Some customers really don't like having that option available because it allows users, to share content very broadly within the organization. Uh, if that's a concern for you, there's a simple fix, as you can see in here. So you can use a PowerShell command to hide that option. Uh, like once it's hidden, users won't be able to select it when sharing, which helps tighten up your internal sharing controls. Now, just a quick note. So this setting doesn't affect Teams created sites, since those follow a different sharing path. But again, for many customers, removing that option from the people picker has been a long-standing request, and SAM supports that kind of customization. And the last setting I want to highlight is at the site level, where there are actually a lot of granular options that many customers aren't even aware of. Uh, I won't go into all of them here, but one that's really worth calling out is this. So you can require site owner approval for any sharing of content within a site. Which is, again, a powerful control. And honestly, a lot of folks don't even know it's possible. So, there's a whole set of site level settings that govern how sharing works. And this is a great opportunity to educate your site owners. So they have more control than they might think, and SAM helps surface those options for sure. So again, it's worth taking a moment to review whether your current site level settings are aligned with your organization's governance goals. Now, let's get into the actual use of SharePoint Advanced Management. And before we even tackle oversharing, there's something important to consider, which is, as you can see, inactive or unused sites. So why start here? Because, reviewing permissions takes time, as you know, and you don't want to spend that time on sites that aren't even being used. It's just not efficient, right? Instead, SAM gives you a smarter way to handle this with the inactive site policy. This feature helps you basically identify which sites that haven't been touched in a while and lets you take action. So whether that's archiving those sites, deleting them, or just flagging them for review. So before diving into permissions and sharing risks, it's worth having a plan for these inactive sites. So let's take a look at how that works. All right, so let's walk through how to actually use SAM to manage inactive sites, which is a great starting point, as I said, before tackling oversharing in your environment. Let me play that video. So in SAM, you'll go into the site lifecycle management, and from there, you'll find the inactive site policy. There's a wizard that walks you through setting up the policy, and it's pretty flexible. Now you can scope, as you can see, the policy however you like. Uh, by default, it applies to all sites, but you can narrow it down to sites with specific labels. You can exclude or include sites. You can uh, under the retention, or even you can target a custom list of sites in this situation. The key decision here is how long does a site need to be inactive before it shows up in this report. For this example here, let's say we choose 3 months. Next, you decide who gets notified, site owners, admins, or both. Back in here. So you can customize the email too that goes out, which is a popular request. And if no one responds after, let's say, 3 monthly attempts, you can define what action should be taken. You can even configure the email to come from custom domain instead of the default SharePoint or Microsoft domain, which can help with trust and deliverability. Plus, you can include, as you can see, like a URL to your policy guidelines to help your site owners make informed decisions. Now, if no one responds, SAM gives you enforcement options. You can make the site read-only, or you can archive it. Archiving integrates with the Microsoft 365 archiving offering, so it's not just a manual process. Now, here's an important principle, and to let you know, this applies to all SAM policy. Yeah, you're gonna see throughout this presentation and in our videos. So you can run those reports in simulation mode or in active mode. Now, I always recommend starting in simulation mode for sure. That way you get the report without triggering any kind of emails or actions. Then you can review the results, you can check the scope and see, like how many sites are flagged as inactive. Once you're confident, let's say everything looks good, everything looks all right, the whole report looks good to you, the results are good, then you can switch to active mode and you can start reaching out to your site owners after that. Now, as site owners respond, their input is reflected back in SAM, so you can track who's confirmed their site is still needed. If you've set up enforcement actions, you'll see those reflected too. Now, one last thing to mention, archiving a site has two big benefits. So first, it's a cheaper storage within Microsoft, which is a huge win for customers looking to optimize costs. Second, archived sites are not visible to Copilot. So if you go through this process you created and you archive any of your sites, they won't be visible to Copilot. It's not going to be able to scour any data, search any data, provide any results out of those archived sites. Again, that means you're not only saving money, but also cleaning up the content Copilot can access. So removing stale, irrelevant data that could clutter result. For many of our customers.
George, I want to highlight that thing that you just said. So archiving is actually can be a very smart storage saver. I work with a couple customers that they were hitting they were getting close to their SharePoint storage caps, and archiving has a less cost for storage space. So moving that to archive can save money, and like you said, removes Copilot. And these sites we can bring them back if we need to from archive. So that's important too. But I think that's a really good one. And the big question is it removes itself from Copilot. I really want to stress that because that's a big one, especially if we've got a site that has really old content and we just need to get rid of that really quickly.
Yes, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I mean, as you said, like for many customers, that's a win-win, like a better governance at the same time and better Copilot performance for sure. So something, yeah, definitely to keep in mind. Right. All right, now we're getting into oversharing here. And, the next couple of steps are all about identifying where it's happening and then, just doing something about it. So let's start with identifying sites that are potentially overshared. And I say potentially because SAM is excellent at surfacing sites and content that's being shared very broadly. But whether that sharing is appropriate or not isn't always black and white, of course. So if you're using purview sensitivity labels, that's a huge help. For example, if a site is labeled highly confidential and you see like a lot of broad sharing happening there, that's a red flag for sure. On the other hand, if a site is labeled public, then broad sharing might be perfectly fine. So again, labels can give you context, and SAM uses that context to make the reports more meaningful in this situation. But if labeling isn't in place, then it often comes down to your human judgment. So usually the site owner who understand the content best. That's why we call it potentially overshared. Now, SAM uses something called DAG reports, that stands for Data Access Governance. These are a collection of reports focused on oversharing. And here's my recommendation. So, and actually, it's our recommendation fast track. So you start with the oversharing baseline report. So this report is basically unique because it gives you a clear snapshot of where broad sharing is happening across your environment. And you can act accordingly after that. Just one quick heads up, I'll show a video in the UI, but the only way that this report used to be requested before was via PowerShell. However, this is changed now in the latest releases, and you should also be able to run it in the UI as well. So let's jump in and I'll explain why this particular report is the best place to begin when tackling the oversharing. So yeah, we're in our SharePoint Online Admin Center under different SAM capabilities. So let's talk about the oversharing baseline report in here, which is again a critical starting point in SAM. Now, since this video was taken from like a prior version and it was only for visualization, the report name you see in here is different from what it actually named in your DAG page. So here it's content accessible to permissioned users, while the existing name today is site permissions across your organization. So, again, just don't get confused by this if you see like a different name. So let me play that video. So first, it's important to understand how this report is different from the other DAG reports you have, because most DAG reports are activity-based, meaning they only look at broad sharing that's happened in the last 28 days. So that's fine for recent activity, but what about content that was shared months or even years ago? That's a big gap, and it's a fair criticism for sure. So, the oversharing baseline report fills that gap. Basically, it's not activity based. It looks at all broad sharing that exists today, like regardless of when it was created. So whether the content was shared yesterday or 5 years ago, if it's still broadly accessible, it'll show up in this report. So that's the first reason it's the right place to start. Now, second, this report gives you a count of permissioned users. So it doesn't just look at sharing links or external access. It also accounts for sharing to Microsoft 365 security groups, which other DAG reports don't show, don't catch even. So, for example, if I share a site with my entire org, that's thousands of people. But it's not flagged by other reports because it's not a link or a specific claim. So this report knows how to look inside those groups and count how many users actually have that access. Now, I mean, when you go and you try to run this report again in your SharePoint Online Admin Center, you can run it against either SharePoint sites or OneDrive. And just a heads up, it can take a while to run, especially the first time. Because after all, it's scanning every document in your environment, every list item with unique permissions that exist in your whole tenant. So depending on your environment, it might take, like few hours up to a few days sometimes. Now, once it's ready, you'll get a site level view, as you can see in here. So one row per site, you'll see the total number of permissioned users, deduplicated, presence of broad sharing links, sensitivity labels, external sharing status, and much more. So this gives you, as the SAM user or SharePoint admin, a clear picture of where to focus. Then, from here, you can decide whether to take the next step, which is a site access review, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So one tip before I move on with the next slide in here, like I recommend running this snapshot report at the very beginning of your SAM journey across all the sites you have in the tenant, because again, you'll get a downloadable file, you can open it in Excel, and from there, you can filter and sort. So for example, some customers only care about sites shared with more, let's say, than 1,000 users. So you can filter on that. If you're using sensitivity labels in your tenant, in your environment, you can filter by those as well. And you can narrow that focus even further. So this report gives you the visibility you need to prioritize your governance efforts. And it's it's definitely the best place to start with when addressing oversharing.
Hey, George, we do have a question that I would love to get your input on. So how do you do all sites, not just 10,000? So, and can the report give you all the permissions per site so you can get a list of who actually shared with and the rights that they have? What are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, after going through, I don't know what type of changes we applied to this report so far, because we keep adding changes to it. So I don't want to go, provide any false information. But basically, if you want to go through all the sites, you don't need to provide any number yet. But if you need to define, a list of all of the sites, then yeah, you don't need to put basically any number. This is how it can give you. Now, about the permissions, yes, it should list all the permissions in that report as well. Now,
Great, thank you.
again, as I said, it can be done through PowerShell, and this is how we did it since we started with SAM. Now it should be available within your UI, so SPO Admin Center. So yeah, I'm gonna have to double check and see how if there are any changes related to that.
Appreciate it. Thanks for sharing.
All right. So at this point in here, we've run the DAG report, and we've got a solid understanding of, again, where broad sharing is happening, at least at the site level. So we've used that data to identify sites that might be overshared, and now we want to dig deeper to determine, whether we just need to see again, we've used the data to identify those sites that might be overshared. So let's see whether that sharing is appropriate or not at this type of situation, right? So this is where the site access review comes in play. It's the next step for sure after running the report, and it allows us to review sharing at more detailed level. Just confirm what's okay and remediate what's not. But here's the thing, you won't be able to complete those reviews instantly. They take time, especially if you're working with site owners to get their input. And sometimes, there's a real sense of urgency. Just you want to mitigate oversharing risk right away, even while those reviews are still in progress. That's why I want to introduce two short-term measures that I'm going to talk about later. And you can take those short-term measures immediately. You don't need to wait for these reviews to be over. So the first one is the restricted access control, or RAC, and the other one is the restricted content discovery, or RCD. So basically, these features help you reduce exposure very quickly without even waiting for that full access reviews to be completed. So while you're working through the deeper governance steps, RAC and RCD give you a way to act fast and start reducing risk right away. So before talking more about RAC and RCD, so just picking up, where we left off, after running the DAG report, we've identified certain sites with broad sharing that we're not confident is appropriate, let's say. So the next step is to initiate the site access review. So let me play that video. So you can do this either through the UI or via PowerShell. As I said, in the UI, each site appears as a row in the report. You can select one or more sites, hit the plus sign, and that kicks off the review process. You can also add a custom comment to provide context, finalize your selection, and then launch the review. Now, as the SAM user or SharePoint admin, you'll be able to track the status of each review, whether it's been initiated, is still pending, or has been completed. You'll get a consolidated view of all of the reviews you've started and where they stand. Now, let's switch perspectives, like who actually receives these review prompts. That would be, in this situation, the site owner for sure. So this is a key role in SAM because the review is delegated to them. For some organizations, IT wants access to this detailed item level sharing data, but SAM is designed to delegate that kind of responsibility to site owners. If you're a SharePoint admin and need access to this level of detail, you can make yourself a site owner. That's an auditable event, which is important for governance. And many customers don't want admins to have default access to site content. So this design, let me pause that for a second. So this design basically helps maintain transparency and accountability. Now, when the site owner receives the review prompt, they're taken to a new user experience built specifically for SAM. So they're not going to have access to the entire SAM capabilities or to the entire SAM environment or to your entire SharePoint Online Admin Center. So they're going to have, again, a built-in experience for that. So this interface shows a list of items with unique broad permissions, not just the site itself, but also, some files, folders, and libraries that exist in there. Because that, after all, in SharePoint, permissions can be applied at multiple levels, right? So for example, like if a folder, as you can see in here, named vendor bills has unique sharing permissions, it will show up as like a top level item in that review. Now the site owner can expand it to see the files inside and assess whether the sharing is appropriate. For example, so like each row shows like the total number of permissioned users, security groups used for sharing, some sharing links like everyone except external users. Like you can hover over the group count to see which groups are involved. For instance, if that document, as you can see, is shared with a group like Contoso FTE, and that group has 4,500 members, that's a major contributor to broad sharing. So this helps the site owner decide whether the level of access is justified. From there, they can click Manage Access to adjust or remove those permissions, whether it's individuals, groups, or links. Now, finally, the status column provides feedback to the SAM user or admin, showing whether the review has been completed and what actions were taken. So that's the site access review. Again, a powerful way to delegate governance, surface risky sharing, and take action at that granular level.
Hey, George, I want to kind of hold on this one. I think this is actually a really important one because I've talked to quite a few SharePoint administrators, and I think one of the challenges they have is just trying to. Sometimes it like all falls on for the SharePoint administrator just trying to figure out how to manage all of this. So this takes a lot of that and puts it back on the SharePoint owners. So I think that's a really important one that a SharePoint administrator has to delegate a lot of this work as it comes to trying to verify broad sharing, verifying inactive and active sites and all of that. So I would really, with that report that George went over, that permissions report, run that. It takes a few days to run that, but that is a really awesome report that gives you as a SharePoint administrator a lot of great delegation to kind of get things under control. So it's not just all on you. You've got a support system behind it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Michael. Yeah, thanks. But now on this slide here, let's talk about something that often comes up after you implement a rec policy. I think I jumped in over, let me see here. Sorry about that. right.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
interrupted
there
your
we
flow,
go.
George. My bad.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just thought back. Yeah, I jumped in like one slide ahead. So yeah, I just wanted to talk before moving forward about RAC, or the restricted access control policy that I mentioned before. So because it's also like an important short-term measure that again admins can take in their through their SAM journey. So let me play that video, and I'm gonna talk about it. So, again, going back to our DAG report, let's say you've identified some sites with broad sharing that we're concerned about. So instead of initiating a full site access review, you can take an immediate action by clicking Restrict Site Access. You can also do this via PowerShell, as I said before, and there's another entry point I'll show if time permits later on. So here's how RAC works. So you specify one security, you specify one or more security groups, and that creates a parameter around the site itself. So from that point forward, only members of those groups can access any content in the site, regardless of any existing permissive sharing. It overrides all other sharing settings. So for example, if I choose the Contoso marketing security group, then only members of that group can access the site. Now, just to clarify, RAC doesn't automatically grant access to all content in the site. So users still need to have permissions to specific content, but again, RAC acts as a gatekeeper, you can say. You must be in the group to even get through that door. So this is specifically useful in cases where a site has only a few members, but someone someone has like shared a document or a folder with the entire company. So with RAC, you don't have to wait for the site owner to take action. You, as the SharePoint admin, can immediately lock down access to just the approved security groups. So it's fast, it's effective, and it's a great tool for customers who need to act quickly to reduce exposure while longer term reviews are still underway. Because again, reviews can take time, and sometimes you need to take some immediate actions in this type of situation. So, and this is where you can use RAC or RCD. Now let's talk about something that often comes up after you implement a RAC policy. Sometimes after restricting that type of access, you might start wondering, like, wait, what if some of those users who are now getting denied actually had legitimate access before? Which is, a fair concern in this situation. So how do you know who's being blocked by the RAC policy? That's where the RAC policy insights come in. So this feature lets admins see attempted access that was denied because of the RAC parameter. It basically gives you visibility into who tried to access the site and was blocked. In this type of situation, you can investigate and decide whether any adjustments are needed. It's a great way, to balance that kind of security with flexibility in your environment. So you can act quickly to lock things down, but still have the tools to go back and make any informed decisions if legitimate users are being impacted. So on this slide, as we said, like while RAC is a powerful tool, it can feel for some admins, users a bit heavy-handed. So there's often concern that it might unintentionally block legitimate access, and not everyone is comfortable with that level of restriction. But even if you're hesitant to use RAG, you might still suspect that oversharing is happening in your environment. And that's where the restricted content discovery, or RCD, comes in. So RCD is perfect for this kind of situation here. And here's the key thing. So RCD does not affect access. So if someone has permission to the content, they can still access it. What RCD does is basically hide that content from Copilot and cross-site search results. Uh, think of it like, like flipping a switch on a site. Like once RCD is enabled, the content in that site won't show up in Copilot responses or in search results that span across sites. So even if something has been overshared, it's much harder for someone to accidentally stumble upon it. So whether they're asking Copilot about, let's say, any sensitive topics, or they're just trying to search across SharePoint. If someone has a direct URL, they can still get to the content, but they won't discover it through AI or search prompts like something, I don't know, like tell me about that kind of sensitive project, or are there any reorgs happening in my environment or in my company? Those types of questions, right? Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with uh, RSS, it's restricted SharePoint search. We used to have it when we started with this SAM journey. It still exists, but RCD works differently in the situation. They look like similar, but no, in fact they're not, because by default everything is visible to Copilot, and with RCD you're opting specific sites out. So it's kind of the reverse of restricted SharePoint search. Also worth noting that RSS has a limit of 100 sites, if you guys remember, on the allow list. So any company wanted to implement RSS while going through the SAM journey, they had to go and put up to 100 allowable list of sites, while RCD has no such limit, right? Which makes it a much more scalable solution in this type of situation. So again, for customers who are especially concerned about Copilot or cross-site search exposing sensitive content, RCD is a smart, low-impact way to reduce that risk without disrupting the access for your end users.
George, I want to add a couple of things there. So the difference between RCD and what we show with restricted site access, to me, like restricted site access is like the more of a heavy hammer approach, where we're overriding any settings and restricting content to just that security group, which is restricted content discovery just removes it from Copilot, and and also something else it does, it also removes SharePoint agents from that site as well. So if we don't want SharePoint agents on there and remove them from Copilot search, RCD is a really great one. I always caution with restricted site access, like use that more cautiously. If you've got really sensitive sites, it's a really good solution, but I wouldn't just use that because just broadly across a whole bunch of sites. Like think about maybe restricted content discovery before you take more of the hard hammer approach with restricted site access. So just some things to think about when in some of the difference between our RCD and our restricted site access.
Yes. Now, everything we've talked about so far, DAG reports, oversharing reviews, RAC, RCD, are great for responding to what SAM surfaces. But I also want to encourage you a proactive mindset. Just don't wait for a site to show up in a report before taking action. So if you already know a site is business critical for you, or it contains any sensitive content, you can apply governance controls right away. For example, you can implement a blocked download policy. So this allows users to basically view the content in the browser, but it prevents them from downloading that content or printing that content or syncing that content to OneDrive. So when this policy is active, users will see a banner at the top of the site explaining why those actions are restricted. So it's clear and transparent. And of course, you can also proactively apply REC or RCD to known sensitive sites. So these tools aren't just for reacting to oversharing, they're also great for preventing it before it becomes an actual and a real problem. So if you know a site is handling confidential projects, executive communications, or anything sensitive, just don't wait, take action early. So let me play that video, which gives you a look at the user experience when a blocked download policy is in place. Uh, so as you'll see, when users access a site with this policy enabled, uh, they can still view the content in the browser, uh, but they're prevented from downloading, printing, or syncing files to OneDrive. There's a clear banner at the top of the site that explains the restrictions so users understand why those actions aren't available. It's a transparent way, as I mentioned, to enforce data protection without disrupting your users' productivity. So this kind of policy is especially useful for sensitive sites where you want to reduce the risk of data leakage, but still allow users to collaborate and view content online. So as you can see here, and while this video is going, so everything I explained, so you can see that banner and everything related to that blog download policy. So this is the point that I spoke about before, which is another way to apply a RAG policy. So let me play that video. Uh, and this time, as you can see, it's not even through SAM. It's right from the standard SharePoint Admin Center. So if you go to your active sites, you can bring up the details for any site. You can head over to the settings tab, and from there, you'll see the option to implement a RAG policy directly. So no need to run a DAG report first. You can proactively apply RAG to any site you already know is sensitive or needs tighter access controls. And of course, you can also do this via PowerShell if you prefer. So there's three ways so far for RAG, either through your DAG reports, like when you're doing your access reviews, or through PowerShell, or through your active sites in your SharePoint Online Admin Center. Again, this is a great option for admins who want to act quickly and apply some of those governance controls without going through the full SAM workflow. All right, so as I promised, I want to quickly touch on the bonus step before we wrap up. But everything we've covered today, from lifecycle management to oversharing controls, can be supported with additional resources. So there are, official Learn articles and documentation available that walk through this guidance in more detail. So I definitely encourage you to check on those resources available for everyone. So these materials, again, are a great way to enforce what we've discussed and help you take the next steps with SAM and Microsoft 365 Copilot. All right, now about that bonus step. So let me take a minute just to talk about it because it's really important one, which is the site ownership policy. So why does this matter? Well, we've talked a lot about how site owners play a key role in SAM, right? They're the ones who perform site access reviews, confirm whether inactive sites are still needed in this situation. But here's the challenge. Like, how do you know you actually have valid site owners for all of your sites? Maybe you did when, let's say, the site was created, but that could have been, like years ago. Maybe that person has left the company, and now you're relying on someone who might not even be there anymore. That's exactly what the site ownership policy is designed to help with. It gives you, like a way to audit and enforce ownership across your environment. So you're not, again, flying blind when it comes to who's responsible for each site. So if you're unsure, like whether your sites have valid owners. This feature, again, is a great way to close that gap and make sure your governance model is built on a solid ground. So let's talk about the site. Let me show you that video. So it's about the site ownership policy, which is, again, a really important. So basically, you can run this as part of an assessment to identify sites that don't meet your minimum owner requirement, say fewer than 2 owners. Then you can decide what action to take. The policy lets you scope which sites to include, set a minimum number of owners, and define how to find new owners. So this policy lets you scope which sites to include again, and you've got several options. So from the menu, as you can see in here, you can ask site admins to identify or become owners. You can ask the existing site owner to nominate someone. You can ask the manager of a former owner who left the company, or you can look at the most active members of the site and suggest one of them. So all of these options are configurable, and they give you that kind of flexible way to ensure every site has proper ownership in place. And as you can see, like going through that video, you can also, similarly with other policies we've seen on this presentation. So you can also customize the email, the sender. You can set your policy to simulation mode or active mode before applying it. But yeah, it's definitely a good way to again define this site ownership policy. Once it's there, as you can see, like you can save it, you can check the progress and the status of that, and you can open it for further details around it. And let's say if you set it to simulation mode, then you can activate that through here as well.
George, this is actually, these 2 reports here, Inactive and Site Ownership Policy, are actually probably my 2 favorite. But something I learned with the Inactive one, I recommend really running these, because back to that thing of like Copilot, if we've got really old content that's not applicable to our organization anymore, it's living on old sites, like this helps remove some of that content. But especially the 2 admin stuff, that also applies to other things like Loop, which use SharePoint as the back end. So so just be aware of some of those as well. That when I first joined Microsoft, I was creating all these Loop workspaces, and then I got all these emails saying I need to add another owner. I'm like, what? And then when I started learning about this, like, oh, this makes sense now. So Microsoft's eating their own dog food here when it applies to some of this stuff. But yeah, it applies to things that also use SharePoint as the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, and this is that was the last slide actually. So hopefully that was helpful for everyone. And yeah, it kind of gave you some additional information on how to prepare and equip your environment with SAM capabilities before start deploying your Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Yeah. George, I really appreciate it. I got one question here I wasn't able to tackle yet. So in the Q&A, how can I assess my SharePoint environment? I went through some reports generated by Sam, but if I wanted a detailed report for site level parent permission and child permissions as well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like for now, I believe the oversharing, the baseline report, this is the most granular report they can tackle at this moment. But other than PowerShell, like we have a bunch of PowerShell commands that they can run for those granular permissions. So if they didn't find in the baseline SharePoint report what they're looking for or that type of granularity, they can try PowerShell because yeah, I'm not quite sure like if we have a full or more detailed report in SAM right now.
Okay.
But I definitely encourage them starting with this report.
So there's some other thing. There's other reports that we can access directly with PowerShell. So that's an answer. Where those PowerShell scripts live, that's the second part of the question that we'll have to do some digging on. But yeah, appreciate it, George.
Pleasure.
Let's see. Anything else in chat here? Meaning SharePoint. Which are the most popular SAM reports that you talk to customers on?
Like most of our customers follow our recommendations. So, I mean, everything I shared throughout I wouldn't say like most popular ones, but yeah, like the baseline one is very popular and it was an ask. So it wasn't even available at some point going through because like we are applying lots of changes through SAM and we keep putting lots of changes. So the oversharing baseline reports is very important. The DAG reports are important, but yeah, like definitely start with the oversharing and which is one of the DAG reports but yeah, DAG reports would be the most recommended and most wanted reports at this point. So yeah, it's definitely a start.
So my top three here, if we want to close, top number one, run your DAG report, which is SharePoint Admin Center, hit reports, and then you got your data access governance section. And there's a report that's called for all permissioned users, I think, something along that line. So run that. That takes about anywhere between 2 to 5 days to run. So run that now so you can check back next week. And then my next top two is the site owner and inactive site reports are awesome. And then a nice little actually like thing that I really appreciate in SAM, you get access to something called change history, which is really cool. You as an admin can go in and look at, especially if you go on vacation for 2 weeks, you can go and see what activity all happened through the past week on certain sites and stuff like that. So that's a cool little one we didn't cover here, but one of the SAM features that I think are kind of really cool for SharePoint admins if they're looking to catch up on stuff or looking at troubleshoot. Like you got someone that says, "Hey, this isn't working." I can go in and see the history and see if someone changed something. And I'm like, "Oh, this is what happened. Let's fix this." A nice little thing that you can do.
Yeah, but, and which there's also something else that I wanted to add, Michael. And I don't know like if all tenants have this capability now, but because as I said, like we keep adding stuff. But if you go through SAM, if you have it in your tenant at the moment, so just go. You can run an assessment, so you can start with this assessment, and it's gonna provide basically with any oversharing site lifecycle any kind of recommendations, attention points that you need to be aware of in your environment, so you can also start with. So yeah, definitely run the assessment because it might take time as well. So
yeah, I know. So what we're talking about for those that are still with us, if you go to the SharePoint Admin Center, there's this little button called SharePoint Management Pro. If you hit that, it kind of brings up a brand new dashboard. This dashboard is brand new, like it wasn't there like a couple weeks ago. And it's in my demo tenant, which is on the production ring. So hopefully it's rolling out to more. But yeah, that's brand new. I haven't even played around with that too much yet, but because I just saw it when we were on earlier today. But another cool one to kind of play around with. But George, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for educating us on SharePoint Advanced Management. I hope I learned a lot. I hope everyone else did. So this will also be put on YouTube and put on our blog, so you'll be able to access that as well. And it's under a playlist on our Microsoft YouTube, so you can see all 4 weeks all at once. But George, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Michael.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Bye-bye, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks you.